Hello and welcome to the Evolve Pipedrive podcast, where we talk all things Pipedrive, sales, apps, and Pipedrive Marketplace. My name is Bruce Bignell. I'm the sales director here at Evolve. It's my great pleasure today to be welcomed and joined by Bryan van Anrooij, the head of marketing at Webinar Geek. Now, Webinar Geek is a webinar platform that allows you to connect or host your own webinars and send leads from your webinars directly to Pipedrive based on registration or viewing behavior. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. We've had some good chats over the last couple of weeks or so. I'm really looking forward to this conversation with Bryan for a couple of reasons. One, his experience as a growth hacker. Now, this might mean a whole load of gobbledygook to a lot of people sometimes, but in Bryan's case, he really has experience growing startups and products and bringing them from an idea to reality with his time at the digital product studio Liters, where he spent 4 years. He's now the Webinar Geeks at Webinar Geek, leading their marketing charge. And he joined Webinar Geek in mid-2020 during the pandemic. I think it was in August time. And he has been involved in the company's unsurprising growth over the last 2 years, which has seen employee count grow over 192%. So there's been a lot of growth over at Webinar Geek. And also, Webinar Geek is on the Pipedrive Marketplace. Ready for you to try out. There'll be links in the descriptions below here. So, Bryan, welcome. Please can you introduce yourself and Webinar Geek to our audience?
Yes, thank you very much. And thanks for having me, of course. Well, now my name is Bryan, and it was a very big introduction indeed. Head of marketing at this moment, indeed, at Webinar Geek after quite some crazy years at Webinar Geek. At this moment, responsible for the marketing team, all the content that we are making, the website, and the webinars that we are hosting ourselves as well. That in short. At this moment, we are in the phase of really like growing from startup to more of like an adult company, where all of a sudden people need to do tasks and we have to like get our goals and stuff. And that's what I'm trying to do with my team, to really have to focus on the main goal that we have, just growing, especially globally. And that's why I'm so happy that you invited me for this talk, of course, so that we get a little bit more like out there what Webinar Geek is and how it can help you, and especially also, of course, in combination with Pipedrive.
Yeah. So that combination with Pipedrive, I think we'll touch upon towards the end of this conversation, right? Because I think you guys actually have a pretty close relationship, or know the software pretty well. So, as I said to you, Bryan, like a lot of our listeners are already on Pipedrive, or they're considering the switch. So they're either business owners, sales leaders, and things like this. So I think wherever you are, I think they're going to get quite a lot of information from this chat. Obviously, with you introducing what Webinar Geek does and how it integrates with Pipedrive. So you mentioned a couple of times there about your team at Webinar Geek. So I've got a couple of questions around that. Webinar Geek, how long has it been running, and what's the kind of the scale of the company now?
Yeah, so it was founded in 2015. So we are out there already for quite some time. The first couple of years, we were very much based in the Netherlands, and we only had Dutch customers. It was in the beginning of 2020 that we were more growing towards Europe, at least. And it was just on the edge of the pandemic, just a weekend before the pandemic started, that we launched our website for our English website, so that people from all over Europe could at least create an account. Back then, we were not available worldwide yet. That was in September 2020. But yeah, we have been growing immensely, especially during that famous weekend where all the countries went in lockdown. We saw our numbers going sky high, and that is, of course, that sounds like a great success, and of course it was a great success. But what you shouldn't forget is, of course, that all of a sudden you also need to support these people. We had, and we still have, and that was something that we are very proud of, a live chat for whoever you are, and with a response time of under the 3 minutes. And we wanted to keep that as it is. We didn't want to drop our support, because it was it was like around 10 times busier than usual.
Hmm.
So during that time, it didn't matter if you were a developer, a marketeer, a salesman, or someone from support.
You
We
were
were
on that.
all chatting. Yeah, exactly. Because there was only one thing that was really like important to us, and that is like like helping customers to understand how to use webinar software. But it was also like asked from us. That was our part in the pandemic, to help people get online again. And where, of course, offline events were cancelled, people needed to switch within like weeks to a digital solution, which is, of course, Webinar Geek, and still is.
Hmm.
And now we are, of course, living in a world, we learned from the pandemic, and we still see that a lot of people are working from home or have a hybrid solution. And yeah, from all the size, doesn't matter if you are a host or slash presenter or a participant. Yeah, people really like got familiar with webinars, and yeah, it has so many benefits, of course, compared to offline events, that it will not like just like fade away again.
No, the industry's been exposed to what webinars can bring to an online event as well. There's, we're recording this in April 2022. I just had to check that what year it was then. But there's Brighton SEO going on in town just down the
Yeah.
road from me. You can hear the seagulls in the background. So that's a predominantly in-person event, but they've now got webinars and all things digitally being hosted as well. So it adds to the flavor of these events of people that can't travel. But I just want to say, what does a typical Webinar Geek customer look like, and has that changed, or did it change in 2020, and how is it continuing to change?
Yeah, well, we saw that. It's a very funny question. It is like we are focusing, and I think the most on the small medium enterprises.
Mm-hmm.
But especially during the pandemic, we had all of a sudden a huge group of yoga instructors
Wow. Okay.
of all kinds of people who were so interested in Webinar Geek because they could actually like continue their classes during with webinar.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's one of the funny examples. But what we are really focusing on is more like the usual um, like customer that we have is really a small enterprise, a small medium enterprise, and I think that is also why it is great that we now have an integration with Pipedrive, because they have
Mm.
more or less the same target audience
Yeah.
that they are trying to help. We of course also have enterprise plans, like more for corporates, but it is especially the company with 50 plus employees who are using webinar software in general.
So what industries that you see are using webinars and have been
Yeah,
using it well,
yeah, that is.
apart from the yoga instructors?
No, yeah, but what we see especially is that whenever someone creates a trial account at Webinar Geek, we are asking them a couple of questions. One of the questions is like, of course, in which industry are you working in, but also what is the purpose of your webinar? And most of them is trainings and education. So that's also more or less the answer already. We see a lot of people coming from the education industry, healthcare industry, also very popular, and online media. So that is SaaS companies, IT companies, these kind of bigger companies.
Mm.
And in our case, since we are GDPR compliant, also quite some government, especially in the EU. If you're using any other webinar software, then you really need to have like going through strict legal procedures. Well, for us, it is a bit easier since we are completely compliant with the GDPR.
So would that be a kind of a key differentiator? Like, why do
Oh yeah,
people choose Webinar Geek?
yeah, for sure. And like I said, since September 2020, we are also available in the US. People sometimes still have the idea that in the US it is different. People are
Mm.
a bit like lazy with privacy, from like the data privacy and stuff. But we see also there that especially bigger companies and organizations like universities and hospitals who find it like almost like a requirement to like work with then a company that at least takes care of their data.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
People are
it's
being,
definitely one of the USPs. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah, it's much more conscious, what's happening to people's data now.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah.
So in terms of obviously Webinar Geek, you've been there, I guess, just over 2 years now. Obviously, new role with the head of marketing, but obviously went in from the growth side. Um, what's changed in from Webinar Geeks 5 year to the last 2 years? How have how have webinars, how have people embraced it, and how webinars change over
Yeah.
the last couple of years?
Yeah, well, I think that whenever you ask someone, what is the first thing that you have in your mind when when I say the word webinar, then people see that's like video screen, like a webcam video screen with a PowerPoint
Yeah.
presentation, or at least slides. That is what we call the traditional setting. If you're lucky with the right webinar software, then you have the side by side view, so that you see the presenter and the PowerPoint. One of the things that we see that is happening is that um, that is really traditional, and you should see a webinar as an online stage, and
Mm.
you can build whatever you want. We started with table talks last year, like beginning of last year, and that really like felt as a much more easier going way of hosting a webinar than just like talking straight to the camera and knowing that also your presentation is there, and just like going down through through the bullet list that you have there and explaining here and there what it is. So what I see as well with other companies is that it is not anymore that traditional webinar setting that they are using. They're getting a bit more creative with the stage that you have. So
Mm.
what I'm trying to say is that you can put a couch there instead of like always a table. You can have maybe multiple guests around the table and just like host it as a talk show.
Hmm.
That way people are trying to like experiment with that. And another thing that's changed, I think, the last couple of years, and I think especially last year, is that people are like repurposing their content more and more,
Mm.
which means that first a webinar was like a one-time event. It happened at that moment, you had to be there, and if you were lucky then you also got a recording. One thing is for sure, people expect a recording right now. So if you're hosting webinars at this moment and you're not sending the recordings, then probably a lot of people are like, then will forget you or will not be there because they
Mm.
don't even have time to be there. They just expect a recording in exchange for their email address, for example.
Yeah.
But one of the things that's really changed is also the idea of on-demand webinars. So people just record something, it is that one moment live, and after that, it is on demand. We have also a nice feature for that. We call it Webinar Channel. You can compare it a little bit with a YouTube channel, where you just have like all your upcoming and on-demand webinars, and people can just subscribe for whatever they want. It might be indeed the upcoming webinars, like being somewhere in the future, or the on-demand webinars that they can see right now. And that also makes it a bit more interesting and effective, especially for marketeers to host webinars, because where normally everything happened in those like 40 minutes, that's where you had to give everything.
Yeah.
And if the amount of attendees was lower than you expected, then it felt a bit as a bummer. But now it doesn't matter anymore because people can just watch it whenever they want if
Yeah.
you convert it to an on-demand webinar, and you will still like gain the results, the data from that person. You will still get your message across to that person, just not on that moment. And yeah, does it really matter?
Yeah, so that's a very good point. So the definition of a webinar, to when you said what do you see as a webinar, and I exactly saw what like the PowerPoint with the face in the corner,
Yeah.
but it was also it was seen as an event. And what is
Yeah.
an event? So you have you so I'm now going to talk about as a salesperson, and we can maybe talk about how salespeople and marketing can work together here, but any event, I always, as a salesperson, I would think you had your pre-work. So, can I book any meetings beforehand?
Hmm.
Who do I want to meet before the pre-work? Right.
Yeah.
You then have the day. So you might who the meetings on the day, any other individuals you can bump into there. Then you've got your post work, so the follow-ups, the nice to meet yous, the let's get that demo booked in, or let's close this piece of work. So you've kind of got 3 touch points there.
Yeah.
With a webinar, it was always the same thing, right? So you had your pre-work to get as many people to sign up as you can. 40% of people turn up, and then you do a follow-up afterwards, right? So, and you might have a CTA. In this new world, you're saying actually that one piece of content that can keep rolling. So then people that couldn't turn up, yes, you can resend it to them, so make sure that's in your workflow, or you can have that same piece of content go out in 4 weeks' time. And if someone engages to it again, great, and you can put them through a different workflow. But how is that changing with the marketing team and sales team?
Yeah.
What's that kind of relationship?
Yeah, that's indeed like if you're not like looking at a webinar anymore as a one-time event, then it all of a sudden also becomes much easier to host a webinar, so that you can host a webinar every week, which might sound like very strange. Host a webinar every week, that sounds like a lot of work, but it's just like 30 minutes talking maybe to your colleague, of like talking like to each other like we are doing right now, and just like streaming that somewhere on a channel. And if you put that indeed online, you can repurpose it by creating an on-demand video so that people can watch it whenever they want. But you also immediately have content that you can spread over your social media channels, especially for the marketeers. It is super easy. Like every webinar recorded every webinar hosted by Webinar Geek is automatically recorded. You can download the recording, and with like the most like simplest and easiest video editor, you can just cut things like that were the most interesting and like spread that throughout your social platforms, or maybe even send it in an email or whatever. And this also helps the salespeople again to like keep that sales workflow or funnel, whatever you have, or however you call it, to keep it flowing. So it is not that one moment anymore. It's just like constantly there, and it will like give you more and more leads. And instead of like 200 leads at that moment, that's that single moment when you had that event, it can be maybe 10 leads every day. But then for the rest of the year, instead of like that one time event of 200 leads. Exactly, or every quarter, indeed. Yeah.
So I don't want to get too meta, but what does the future look like here? Right. So when I say meta, I could foresee it as that there's something that works very well with video, and we've got very used to it. But I was talking to someone the other day on a podcast, I think it was, and we don't ever actually get to look at each other in the eyes. So there's kind of a disconnect, right? So what does the future look like for Webinar Geek? We don't have to get down to meta, but from team expansion, features, what comes next?
Well, I think that as what we are now focusing on very much is just really building new features, a lot of them. But I think that if it comes to the future of webinars, it is especially the fact that we see that more and more organizations are becoming less of a human. It is you're buying from a website without interacting with anyone. That's what shopping does, of course, as well. Whenever you want to buy shoes, then you don't go to a shop anymore, but you just like go to any shoe a web shop and you buy shoes.
Don't tell my wife I've just bought some new trainers.
But what you actually want is like to still like buy it from someone. And the nice thing with webinars is, of course, that you can, as a salesman, reach out to a bigger audience all at once. They can watch that webinar wherever they are, whenever they are, or whenever they want. And you really build like a trust and a relationship with that customer. I think that is something, especially now, like after the pandemic, we want to be like in touch with people again. That's one thing. So I think that also the amount of offline events will go back to like normal-ish. But at the same time, webinars on the side instead of like replacing webinars again. How we first replaced offline events again. So you will have those offline events, especially for the B2B sector, but that will just still like be once in a quarter, because you have to rent out a venue. You have
Yeah.
to like do so many things that you're not going to do that every month all of a sudden because the pandemic ended.
Yeah.
That's going to cost quite some, and like apart from the energy and time, and that's like with webinars, you will see that it will be more and more just the case that you will host webinars every month. And again, that it doesn't need to be a webinar from an hour. It can also just be a half an hour, just a quick chat.
I was just thinking, how do you internally define a webinar? Is it
Yeah, that's
have you got a definition for webinar?
yeah. Well, yeah, we looked it up in the dictionary. Now, yeah, it is. It comes from the word seminar,
Yeah.
and
So
it's
is
just
it
like web
lessons
seminar.
and yeah.
So, but and that's also the things that what we have been, well, not really struggling with, but it has so many names because we can call it a webinar, but you can also call it a workshop or a
Mm,
masterclass,
yeah.
or a e-college, what we sometimes see, or like, yeah, you name it, and it's as
Yeah.
long as it isn't like a recording from someone online, like giving you probably some knowledge.
Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't matter if you call it a masterclass or indeed a webinar or an online seminar. We sometimes also see that one still. Um, for us, it is really like becoming like showing who you are, building that relationship with the customer, and then on a bigger scale, and super easy. That is what would be a webinar, I think, for us. Um, and what we also want for in the future is that we are really sticking to webinar software. We see other competitors also creating video conferencing software. We are definitely choosing to stick with that webinar software. And
Mhm.
for us, webinar software also means you will have a couple of presenters, but not the whole audience.
Yeah.
And the participants are like you're looking at the stage, and are not chatting with the presenters on the stage. They
Yeah.
are sitting there and watching, and they can still interact. We all have different in the webinar software, and that's the same in, I think, many different webinar softwares. We have a chat box, of course. You
Yeah.
have interactions so that you can answer very easily questions from the audience. So there is still like this kind of interaction, but especially that a group of professionals are telling their story, transferring their knowledge, or maybe even educating the audience. And the audience itself is not visible,
Mm.
is muted, or like cannot make any sounds. Also, to make sure, of course, that whenever you have a recording, that not all of a sudden someone's dog is barking and
Yeah.
your recording is gone to waste. Yeah, I'm not saying too
No, she's been very good today.
long.
Okay, great. So that's a really nice kind of overview of Webinar Geek and the future. What's about with Pipedrive, right? 'Cause you mentioned the ongoing webinars that you might record once and then run
Yeah.
monthly, and about having these leads drop in, you know, 10 a day or 5 a day, whatever it might be. What's your experience between the two systems, Webinar Geek and Pipedrive?
Yeah, that is a good question. I think that the first thing is like, since we are focusing more or less on the same type of customer, I see that the systems both work more or less the same. We are both browser based. Everything can be done in the browser, but also the easiness of customizing the software, either with Pipedrive or with Webinar Geek, is very easy and can be done in whatever way you want. So instead of having a big software platform where certain things need to be set up by a professional, you can just do it yourself. It is
Mm.
that easy. That is like why you are probably that marketeer who is tech savvy enough to just like discover it yourself, or as maybe has that type of curiosity to say like, I want to do it myself. I don't want like a marketeer to another marketeer from an agency to set it up for me. I know my brand the best. I know exactly which colors I should use. I know how to like upload my own logo, and I think with Pipedrive that is more or less the same. Is that you are in control. You don't need anyone else than yourself to set up your own account. and set it up in a way that it fits to your organization, to also make processes go a bit more smooth. And I think that Pipedrive is great in that. Is that I give you so many like freedom in how to customize it in whatever way you want. Is that and that makes it easy to fit for every single company. And that's also what we are like as a one-liner having on our one of our most important pages on the website is that Webinar Geek is the one size fits all platform, and I think that Pipedrive is the one size fits all CRM platform, because it doesn't matter if you are self-employed or working in a bigger enterprise. You can use Pipedrive any way you want.
And how do because obviously there is an integration. It's on the Pipedrive marketplace.
Yeah.
How do they integrate together?
Like setting it up is quite easily. You just have to like go to Webinar Geek, log in with your Pipedrive login credentials.
Yeah.
And what it does is that there are 4 triggers that you can choose from. It is a new subscriber, new viewer, and that is like someone who actually showed up at your webinar.
Yeah.
New paid subscriber, so someone who also like paid for your webinar, and no viewer, so someone who did not show up to your webinar.
Yes.
Those are the 4 triggers that you have. And the 2 events that we have at this moment is create contact and create or update deal, which makes it possible that the moment that people are registering for for a webinar, that like immediately that contact will flow through your Pipedrive and be shown in your contact list, for example.
Yeah.
And that is the nice thing if you're working together between a marketing team and sales team, is that the marketing team sets up the webinars, is maybe even hosting the webinars. At least for us, that is very often the case. That's also the marketeers are the ones setting up the webinars and hosting the webinars.
Yeah.
And sales team is getting the result of the webinars, and the better the presentation and the preparation, of course, from the marketing team, the more leads the sales team will get.
Nice. And what's the best way for people to find out about that integration?
The best way to find out.
We can record something after this, and we can.
Yeah, so you can, of course, we have a recording from like a demo, a small demo.
Yeah.
But the best way is to just start your Webinar Geek plan in that case, and then you can go to, I think, your account settings, integrations, and there you find, of course, the Pipedrive integration that we have.
Yeah.
Super easy to set up. And that is, again, I think this thing that we have in common with Pipedrive is that it is just like one click away. It's not, you don't have to, there's no code involved at all. And it is literally like integrating within one click. That is, I think, the easiest.
Yeah, and obviously from Webinar Geek integrates with loads of different platforms. You know,
sure.
It's not just Pipedrive is there.
Yeah, true indeed. Yeah, we have all kinds of platforms. Mailchimp is probably sounds very familiar to most listeners. But also Zapier is, I think, one of the most popular integrations, and HubSpot is another one that's with HubSpot we even have a 2-way integration, so it can sync from Webinar Geek to HubSpot and the other way around. And we have a couple of more integrations, especially also with Zapier. I think that's when I started using Pipedrive. One of the reasons to choose for Pipedrive is because of their great integration with Zapier, because in that way you could like integrate very easily with a Google Sheets, for example.
Yes, yeah, you can do. Yeah, that again, it's a no-code option that just allows you to do more with between the 2 systems. Okay, thank you for that. Can you tell me a little bit more about your journey so far? Right, so you joined this company, Webinar Geek, mid 2020 in August during the pandemic. I mean, how's that been? What's it like being involved in a company that's been scaling as much as it has been. And I guess, are you currently working remotely? Are you back in the office? What's the?
Yeah. Well, to answer that last question very easily, we have now a hybrid system,
Yeah.
especially because we've grown so much that we actually do not fit all of us in one
Yeah.
office.
Nice.
So I'm going to the office on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and for the rest of the days I'm working from home.
Yeah.
Which is fine for me. It is especially that those days working at the office is more like a social event, and it is
Yeah.
actually for working. But it was indeed in August. Now, yeah, it was actually a bit before that. I think it was in May 2020. My son was just born, and I got a message from an old colleague like, "Hey, we really need some help. Company's growing, and maybe you should have a chat with the CEO and with the founder of Webinar Geek." And I was just like, I was that type of dad who was not expecting to not sleep for like nights. And I mean, I am quite a good sleeper, but yeah, with a baby next to you, a newborn baby, it was not that easy. But I was thinking like, let's give it a try. I mean, webinar software, that is that's a growing business, right? So I called and went to an interview, and very soon after that, you have of course summer vacation in between, and I started in August, and it was really like um, uh, um, it almost feels like a group of friends who is like building great webinar software. And that makes it, I think, very cool to work at Webinar Geek, is that sometimes we still have like time to just play Mario Kart or table tennis for 2 hours. But at the same time, everyone has their responsibilities, and you make sure that your work is done. And that's, I think, the thing that I like a lot about Webinar Geek as an employer. But we started very soon, like after in August, the biggest wave of like supporting, like that everyone was doing support, was more or less over. So we had time again to get back with the marketing team and start like actually doing marketing instead of handling chat support.
And that was
So
because of the influx of just how many people were using the.
yeah, exactly. And you could see, of course, also that when the second wave of the pandemic started, which was, I think, somewhere in November 2020-ish, I think somewhere there, or maybe January, like, by then we had quite a stable marketing team and a stable support team. So we could actually handle that wave much easier. We could still like do our marketing work without like support being having a response time of 5 minutes.
Yeah.
But the like first thing that we were doing is really like looking at the expenses that we had at that moment, and seeing like where do we still have opportunities to improve. What are the things that like the most the biggest challenges that we have at this moment, and that's also where my growth hacking like role came in. Is that I work with the Pirate funnel. Maybe you have ever heard of it. It's like a customer journey method. It's called R, which stands for awareness, acquisition, activation, revenue, retention, and referral. And it more or less shows like the whole customer journey from like the moment that people see your logo for the first time till the moment that they are an ambassador for your brand. And I started with like putting all the like issues and like challenges like on that path. And from there on, we just like started what's the most important. Where are people like stuck in the flow, in the funnel that we created, and started like making changes there. One of the things that we see is that quite some people were having a trouble with like starting their own webinar. And one of the things that like rolled out from there is that whenever you create a webinar account right now, then you don't need to create a webinar anymore. There is a webinar there already, like with slides ready to be hosted. Of course, not slides from the company itself. That would be the dream, of course, to immediately like see what kind of company has been like registering on your all your software and then like have a slide ready for them. But people can immediately see how it works to host a webinar without creating anything. Just like fill in your email address, click on register account, and there you go, you are hosting a webinar. This is one of the things that we changed like as soon as possible. Took quite some time, of course, because that involved some development work. And so on. We like continued also with the part of retention. A lot of people are still like seeing webinars as a one-time event. So we started making it a bit more clear what you could do with webinars after that one-time event, how easy it is to convert a live webinar to an on-demand webinar, and so on. And I think it was last year somewhere where we were also officially thinking about expanding to the US. Maybe a good premiere in this podcast is that we are actually starting an office in New York
Cool.
around summer. Yeah. Well, there was a colleague of mine who joined by then, and he is the one who is going to be the entrepreneur there, the pioneer who is driving the sales there. And it was also the moment to get a bit more of like a structure in the company. Who is responsible for team marketing? Who is responsible for the team in the US very soon? And who's responsible for all the support employees and the processes there? And that is the moment that I got picked as head of marketing, and well, here I am sitting right now.
Here we go. Yeah, no, I love that kind of growth journey. You know, what you described as that kind of that family and everyone working, where everyone's wearing all the different hats. Yes, you might have fun together, but everyone puts the work in together as well, right? So that I'm sure there were some late hours there. But then you get to a certain stage. I'm sure it's Jim Collins' Good to Great, where he talks about, I think it's 28 to 29 or 30 employees, where you basically need to start defining roles, and this is your channel, what you're gonna. So this is your growth channel. This is your growth channel. This is your growth channel. So then you start putting processes around that. You can't just be someone that's involved in everything anymore. That you have to kind of define your roles there.
Yeah, and that was, I think, also for us the challenge there is that we were growing so fast that where you normally hit indeed the moment that you have 30 employees, then you start thinking about that. But the moment that we hit the number 30, it was like 2 months later, it was already 35. So it goes so fast that you need to execute and then plan. that fast it goes, of course, which is, I think, and I must say, like, for me personally, I love that chaos, and I love to like bring some structure into that chaos, and that's why I think Webinar Geek fits me very, very well. But you need to be able, of course, also to handle that. I mean, it's quite you need to also, what we are asking for people who are applying for a job at Webinar Geek is like, can you handle the chaos which sometimes like is still there, even though we are trying to build structure? It's
still a startup, and I mean, there could be a whole nother conversation around the mentality of being in a startup, right? So which isn't for everybody.
No, true.
No, but in terms of just kind of the final couple of kind of quickfire now, the quickfire questions, they can be long formed answers. But in terms of Webinar Geek and Pipedrive, what's the best use case that you've seen between the two?
But I think the best use case so far involves lead funnel that like constantly like fills itself by it like we built this our own. We have most of the webinars that we are hosting are webinars that we also convert to on-demand webinars, which people can see whenever they want, like I said before. And I think that is something that makes the sales team super happy. So how we are working as a use case is that my marketing team is hosting the webinars, making sure that the webinars are there, doing the presentation, everything from A to Z, and we are delivering leads to the sales team in the end, or at least also information about maybe the leads that they are already working on. And the great thing about this, and that is, I think, also what I said before, is that it is not that one single moment that we are hosting a webinar and the day after we are expecting from the sales team to call 200 people. that time that is not there anymore. They just like get a notification in their Slack channel that someone subscribed for a webinar, and then 30 minutes after they just call them and ask them, "Hey, how was the webinar?" Well,
Yeah.
that's I think a very personal approach, which surprises people like in a positive way, by the way,
Yeah.
and makes it like so much more human that all of a sudden you have someone calling with you who was actually maybe even presenting that webinar.
Yeah.
That feels then all of a sudden like that you have that there is a connection between that lead and the company already.
Yeah.
I think that
Great.
is one of the use cases that I should definitely mention.
Love that. And what about? I always like to ask this question about people getting started in webinars. So,
Yeah.
for top tips for getting started and a top tip to excel. So, someone that wants to get more out of their webinar geek.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think top tip to get started is especially don't make it too hard for yourself. Small steps are like you can better make like a couple of small steps than trying to like have one big step. What we often see is that if you really want to do it perfect, then you're not going to make it at all. So it is much better to just like go out there, create an account, just host a webinar, see how it is. Because in the end, your first webinar is not going to be the best. That's the same, I think, for everything. Like the first time that you stepped on a bike, it was not your most perfect like ride with the bike. And
Yeah.
the first time that you sat down in a car and started driving was also not the best one. Probably the last one that was quite perfect. And that is like what you have to see as when you're starting with webinars. Is there is a growth in there, and you really need to get used to the software, to the hardware, what people are expecting. So yeah, my tip would be just start as low key as possible with a minimal viable product actually, so that you can just test out the software, see if you like it, because that's I think very important. See if you are comfortable in front of the camera. You do not, of course, get any like apart from the chats and the interactions, but you do not get any feedback from people sitting in your office room, of course, or whatever. That is I think something new compared to the like old way of standing in front of a group. And a tip for growing with webinars is really like looking at that webinar like part event as an more as an online stage, and design it the way you want. So you can do it, like I said before, with a table talk, but get creative in there, because that helps you with creating new concepts for different types of webinars. Which also like gives you the opportunity to maybe even categorize your webinars. Like, hey, today we have again a table talk which is about subject marketing, and the other day we have more of a traditional webinar setup with a demo video, and that makes it, in that case you really make it more or less like an own channel, like really like a streaming channel.
Yeah.
And yeah, then in that case you're really like see the growth in there as well with the amount of subscribers. Oh, maybe by the way, another good tip that I have is that we are currently also using Restream. That is an app that helps you stream your webinar on multiple platforms like LinkedIn, like Facebook, like YouTube.
Yeah.
And that helps a lot as well, because whenever you are online on one of these platforms, then that platform pushes you on top of everyone's news feed, and it sends a notification to all the followers. So
Yeah.
if you have quite some followers on one of these platforms, then it might be they you see, of course, they will all get a notification and they have the time to watch your webinar.
Yeah, that's a really good pro tip actually. I first got introduced to Restream a few weeks back actually, so
Yeah,
yeah, it's a
yeah,
very very cool piece of kit.
yeah.
Any Pipedrive feature requests?
More leads.
More leads.
No.
So,
uh,
so is that
no,
more handling of better functionality to handle leads?
no, I think that what would be nice, and I don't know if it is there already. So maybe maybe it is already there, but maybe in a bigger plan or whatever. You have, of course, with competitors of Pipedrive, the possibility to place a pixel somewhere on your website so that you can see what kind of companies came across your
Yeah,
website.
so they've got the web visitors. So
Ah,
underneath
okay.
in the lead booster,
No.
yeah. So maybe if you up your plan there,
Yeah, well, the thing is that we have upgraded our plan last week, and now like Pipedrive is completely in control of the head of sales of Webinar Geek.
okay,
So maybe I should have a talk with him about this particular part,
yeah,
because this is something that I think that I find very interesting as well. Is that in that case you could also turn it around and start inviting these people to your
yeah.
webinars again, so that there
That's
is
that's
really
a, that's a great workflow. Yeah,
yeah, exactly.
yeah. Because so through the prospector lead visitors, see who they are through the prospector feature, get the
Yeah,
head or the MD, say, great, we know that your business is, are you considering this service? Cool.
yeah,
And then put
yeah,
them through your channel there.
yeah.
There we go. Well, great, Brian. This has been a really fascinating conversation. I know this is your family day, so I'm super conscious and
No
thankful for you
worries.
to spend the time with me today. Was there anything in particular you wanted to cover before we signed off?
No, yeah, of course. As marketeer, the only thing that I could say to the audience is that if you have the feeling that hosting webinars is something for you, then make sure to create a free trial account for 14 days.
Yeah.
No strings attached, and you can find us on webinargeek.com.
Perfect. And I'll be sure to put all of those links in the
All the links.
description
Yeah.
below here. So on the Pipedrive Marketplace and the 14-day free trial as well. Well, that's it for this week. I hope you've enjoyed it. I know I certainly enjoyed, spending time with Brian there. Thank you for listening to Evolve Pipedrive Podcast. If you have enjoyed it and found some value, please consider liking, subscribing, and sharing with anyone that you think will find this useful. Appreciate it. Thank you, Brian.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Cheers. See ya.